Değerli misafirlerimiz, programımıza kaldığımız yerden devam ediyoruz. Şimdi 4. oturumumuza geçeceğiz. 4. oturumumuz Finansal Merkezler, Yenilikçi Finansman ve Büyüme ismiyle gerçekleştirilecek. Bu oturumu Emerald Corporation CEO ve Yönetim Kurulu Başkanı Cornelia Meyer modere edecek. Onun moderatörlüğünde Nasdaq OMX Grup Başkan Yardımcısı Sandy Meyer-Fuscher, Kirchhoff Consult AG CEO'su Klaus Rainer Kirchhoff, Frankfurt Main Finance Genel Müdürü Herbert Watt'ın yer alacağı Finansal Merkezler, Yenilikçi Finansman ve Büyüme isimli oturumumuz başlıyor.
İyi günler and a very warm welcome to this, the third or fourth session of this very important conference. We are here today to speak about financial centers, financing innovation and growth. Innovation and growth are the key sources of economic performance. The session aims to explore how the various financial centers finance growth, which is infrastructure, corporate and sovereign debt, equity, etc. The panel will very importantly look at various ways in which financial centers finance innovation, and we have a key market that is the key market to finance innovation sitting here to my right, and I'm very pleased about that. The panelists will look very much at it from their financial centers. We will start with less than 5 minutes or 5 minutes introductory statements by every participant. Then I will ask maybe one question, two questions, then we open it up to the floor. And Mr. Meyer-Fuscher will have to leave at 4 o'clock sharp, so this session will end at 4 o'clock sharp. Without further ado, the speakers today are Mr. Hubertus Fed, who manages Frankfurt Main Finance. He is a very strategic thinker and has been pivotal in positioning Frankfurt so very well in the global markets. Being British and coming from London, you know, it's always nice to have some competition, I guess. Then we have Mr. Klaus Rainer Kirchhoff, who is the chairman of Kirchhoff Consult AG Germany. He has helped many companies to get listed. He also has, as I've been told, a unique expertise in presenting companies. You know, he knows how an annual report should be presented, and this is very good at that. And our really important speaker here, and I'm very honored that we have him here, thank you so much for agreeing to come, is, who needs no further introduction, is Sandy Meyer-Fuscher, who is the vice chairman of Nasdaq. Nasdaq, as we all know, is, when we look at financing technology innovation, there is nothing like Nasdaq. So without further ado, Hubertus, take it away, please.
Thank you, Cornelia, ladies and gentlemen. Coming from Frankfurt, that is the smallest of the global financial centers. Let me start in terms of innovation, what happened in Frankfurt as a center lately. Let me start with financing small and medium enterprises. There is an instrument which is called Certificate of Debt. Probably not many of you have heard about that instrument. It's a very plain vanilla credit instrument, which usually has a duration of 7 to 15 years. It's not market to market, yet it is used to be refinanced by banks, by the ECB, and it finances small and medium enterprises at the size of 20 all the way up to 500 million euro. That is a brand new instrument which is copied now more and more around the globe, from Korea all the way to India and China. People have been coming and studying that instrument because it became pivotal in financing small and medium enterprises. Another innovation in Frankfurt has been CRX. It's a trading platform for asset-backed securities. Another important instrument, as you probably have learned, that ECB is looking into opportunities to strengthen lending to small and medium enterprises companies, and a trading platform for that would be pivotal. Let me move from that on to foreign exchange, the biggest of the financial markets. In Frankfurt, we have a key player with 360T, which broke through the crucial barrier of 100 billion turnover a day when it comes to foreign exchange, not talking dollar, pound, but talking Turkish lira, rupees, rupiah, and RMB. They have a market share of more than 10% in those areas and are strong at the heels of the Bloombergs and the likes. And this is another area where Frankfurt has been excelling, foreign exchange, as we became the Euro's RMB clearing hub. That's been one of the major areas where we believe the future lies, as the RMB is going to become a global trading currency. Here we have expecting about 2 months from now the clearing bank up and running. You probably have heard of Luxembourg, Paris, and London also competing on that. London clearly has the same setup for the pound. Paris is quite a bit behind, whereas Luxembourg is clearly focusing on its strengths, which is investment vehicles, and Frankfurt is focusing on trade. To give you a little bit of better understanding how relevant that is, Germany trades more with China than the UK, France, and Italy combined. And the same applies for the entire foreign direct investments that Germany does in China. Coming back then to my third point of innovation, it's probably a little more substantial, and let me call it the aspect of sustainability of financial centers. I like to make the example of Merrill Lynch. like to make the example of Merrill Lynch, which throughout its entire life, which we all know has ceased, has lost as much money in the last couple of years of existence than it earned in all the years before. So sustainability is a big thing. So what we've done in Frankfurt is we set up something called SAFE, a research project called SAFE Architecture for Financial Enterprises, with 80 scientists just doing research on how to have a financial system sustainable. We have set up a PPP, which is called FIRM, Frankfurt Institute for Risk Management and Regulation, where regulators and risk managers are jointly educated. And to then come to my last point, in Frankfurt we have 3.5 out of 5 pillars of the supervisory infrastructure in the new Europe landscape, and that is the supervision of the European banks out of the ECB. So that's going to be probably the most relevant innovation coming out of Frankfurt. It's in the process to being set up, about 1,000 additional people, which will then supervise throughout Europe the banking unions' banks.
Thank you, Hubertus. Mr. Kirchhoff, Mr. Fett has very aptly described all the innovations that have happened in the financial center. Now, you, from all your global experience, can you look at how these financial centers, and Frankfurt is also one of your centers, actually do finance growth? Because one thing is, and innovation. One thing is these centers innovating themselves. The other side of the coin is growth that needs to be funded, and especially also emerging markets growth that needs to be funded also by stock markets. I would mention the AIM, the UK AIM, which is unparalleled in terms of financing companies from real emerging markets. We're talking Africa and places like that. So can you give us share your wisdom with us, please?
Yes, you know, I consulted 62 companies on their IPO. Many of them were high-tech companies. Some of them came from Israel, from China, 13 companies. The first thing we do when a company approaches us and asks for an IPO advisory is not think about the place. First, we look at the company and want to see if the company is really ready. Often, for example, in Turkey, companies came to us and we said, you are too small now for an IPO, you should have a private equity investor before the IPO, you should follow your strategy, and after 2 or 3 years you might be ready for an IPO. So this is the first step. The second step is, which is the right marketplace? Nasdaq is by far the most interesting platform for high-tech and especially internet companies, but if they have a certain size, you know, if a company wants to go public and wants to raise, let's say, 50 million, a company from Istanbul or a company from Hamburg, I doubt if Nasdaq is the right choice because of several reasons. It's a very, it's far away. If you are listed at a stock exchange, you have 100 days per year investor relations. If you have to do this in 2 time zones with this distance, it might be really a challenge. So we know, for example, that we have an increase in IPOs in the tech industry. We had about 43 tech IPOs in the second quarter, which is much more than before. Most of them went to New York, majority to the Nasdaq, but also 12 to NYSE, and only 5 to London, and all the other stock exchanges don't play a role in this game. This might change. For example, we have 2 internet companies that want to go public in Germany in the next 2-3 months, and both are with a volume of about 500 million to 750 million. So what I would always suggest to think about is, what is the right marketplace for me concerning the size of my IPO, but also concerning, for example, my market. If I am a strong brand in Germany, why should I go to the Nasdaq? Why shouldn't I use my brand and the awareness in the market and go public in Frankfurt? And if I'm a strong brand in Istanbul or in Turkey, why should I go anywhere else? So this is also something you should have in mind on this question. What AIM is concerned, I'm a little bit restrictive about this. I can tell you why. First, a stock exchange where more companies are delisted per year than listed makes me a little bit nervous, because my philosophy is, when a company wants to go public, this opens a new stage in the life of a company. It's not only an IPO, it's the life as a listed company, which means you have the access to the capital market. You can go there when you need money with a capital increase. You can give a corporate bond or something else. Another thing, the last thing I want to mention, is that we talk about innovation, not only innovative companies that go public, but also innovation in financing. And there's one interesting instrument which also could be interesting for Turkish companies, that is the self-issuing of corporate bonds, which is listed at the stock exchange in Germany, at Frankfurt, for example. This is, from my experience, a fantastic instrument before the IPO. For example, a company is not ready for the IPO because of several reasons. They could issue a bond independent from the banks, and this is a good way to have a broader financing situation in my company than only depend on loans of banks.
Thank you very much. Just in quick defense, I can't help myself, quick defense of the AIM. It is really companies from many very, very small countries and in difficult sectors, you know, in sectors of minerals, mining, and so on, which is very volatile, and that volatility, you know, does bring companies to delist. It's not ideal, but they will. May I ask you, sir, now to talk about your perspective from financing growth, from Nasdaq, and also from, if you are an emerging economy, where would you go? How would you do it?
Well, let me, first of all, thank you very much for having me. There are 2 themes here that this panel, I guess, is focused on. One is the financial center. And here in Istanbul, there is a project underway to create a financial center. I've had a very eclectic life, professional life. I remember once saying to my mother that I had just gotten a new job. And my mother looked at me and she said, I just wish that every other year you wouldn't have another job. Her view of stability in life was to have a 30-year experience in a kind of civil service situation. You get a watch when it's over and you go fishing. But in another incarnation, I worked for the state of New York, and I was president and CEO of something called the World Financial Center in New York, Battery Park City. And so we helped, I helped build Battery Park City, which is right across the street from the World Financial Center. It's a mile and a half of Manhattan. And so when the first delegation from Istanbul came and said, what do you think about the idea of us building a World Financial Center? There's a whole lot of question marks about whether or not physical location has any relevance. And I said to them that even in the age of technology, where you can talk to anyone around the world, and you can interact or trade in the blink of an eye or less, the ability to interact with people and to find people in a relatively manageable area, district, has great relevance, particularly when it comes to the financing side, because no matter how you do it, no matter how good your technological skills are, a lot of business, and I would say openings and closings, are largely done through the ability to communicate and interact. So having a financial center is very, very important. I once had the honor of being on a panel, and the panel was sponsored by the American-Brazilian Chamber of Commerce. And the question for the panel was whether or not location counts. And so in answer to the question of whether or not location counts, rather than articulate my view, I decided to sing the song, New York, New York. The opening lines are, I'm leaving today, I want to make a new start of it in old New York. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Now, the truth of the matter is that I'm not here to be part of or an extension of the Chamber of Commerce. The fact is that, however, that there are certain imperatives, certain essentials if you want to be a financial center. You have to have a density of people who do the business, and in order to get those people, you need other things. If you want to have a strong financial center, you have to have a strong cultural center, and an art and theater and music. It's very, very important. You have to have places where people can express themselves and have a way of having a good, and by good, I don't mean a big house, I mean an exciting lifestyle in an exciting place. That's how you're going to attract good talent to come, whether it's to London, it's to Frankfurt, it's to whatever. A financial center has to be, in today's world, it has to be a technologically up-to-date place. It has to have the resources to have essentially one-stop kind of shopping. And it has to have good restaurants and all of the rest. It has to have a good transportation system. It has to have a raison d'etre for it to be successful. And so when you look at all of the elements that are necessary to be a financial hub or financial center, Turkey, Istanbul in particular, is an ideal place to have it, not just for the region of the Middle East, but because it is a crossroads of Asia and Africa. It is a stable part of the Middle East, and it also speaks to Eastern Europe and beyond. So it is ideally situated. And what I think the Turkish government has done with the Borsa Istanbul is extraordinarily exciting, and it's a very proactive way of establishing Istanbul as certainly as a regional hub, financial center, somewhere, you know, and I think probably the strongest one, no doubt, between Central Europe and Central Asia. So, as a starting point, the opening, I think that I'm happy to be here in Istanbul, and I think when I come back here in 5 or 6 years, when the buildings are built and the infrastructure is in, you will see Istanbul as a leading center for commerce and finance and trade, a leading center that really will be a major financial center.
Thank you. I have 2 very quick questions, and one question goes to Mr. Meyer-Furcher and Mr. Kirchhoff, and then, because he's so special, Mr. Feth will get the last question, and then we open it up. When you look at a place like Istanbul, would you say, does it make sense for cities that want to establish themselves as a financial center to play on strengths, to play on certain niches? When I think of Istanbul, certainly Islamic finance would be one of the niches where they could, you know, Malaysia is very big, some cities in the Gulf are very big, we need another big one in the region, in the greater Islamic region. Is that something that they should sort of focus on next to other things?
Oh, absolutely. Why would you reject your major strength, and why would you reject your fundamentally who your population is? It is a major strength. When you compare Istanbul to other major cities, look, you know, you can see cities rising out of the sand across a lot of the Middle East, particularly in the Eastern Gulf. Doha, Dubai, you know, you see literally things emerging from the Gulf, but they do not have the depth, the history, the diversity that Istanbul has. So the answer, I say, is a resounding yes. You know, there's a great expression that I like that comes out of American slang. You know, you need different strokes for different folks. But at the end, there are some basic universal elements, so it doesn't have to be one thing. In fact, the more things it is, the better. And certainly Islamic finance is a major component.
How do you see that, Mr. Kirchhoff, and also a little bit broader? Are there others, you know, other strengths that other centers should focus on? As Mr. Feth has said, Frankfurt is very strong on the euro side, as the ECB is there, and as Germany is such a huge economy.
You know, Napoleon once said, if the world needs a capital, it would be Istanbul. I can understand that quite well. I love to be here, and I try to be here as often as possible. Because of the fact that Istanbul and Turkey plays one of the most important roles in the development of the future world. Especially because of their relation to the Arabic world, to the Southeast world. Istanbul could be a very important place for those investors in this area that are interested in capital markets. Hillary Clinton, when she was secretary, held a speech when I was in Washington, and she said there are 5 countries in the world the US have to focus on to create the future world. It's China, it's India, it's Mexico, it's Brazil, and it's Turkey. It's not United Kingdom, it's not France, it's not Germany. So there are very good opportunities for that. What I would like, and I sometimes try to insist with the former chairman of the Borsa Istanbul and with a minister I met on a conference, that Turkey would open a little bit more the capital market. For example, it's difficult for foreign investors to invest because they need to have a Turkish tax number. Nobody loves tax numbers. I even don't love my tax number, and I would not love to have a second one. But if this, for example, little thing would be changed, it would be possible to have dual listings for companies. And I give you a good example why this would make sense. If there is a strong Turkish company that wants to go public, and it could be public, for example, in Istanbul and parallel in Frankfurt, it would reach the investor world of the Borsa Istanbul, it would reach the investor world of Frankfurt Stock Exchange, and it would reach a population in Germany, the Turkish society, with about 35 billion euros in their pockets. So guess if there's a strong Turkish brand that would like to reach all these investor groups, even the private investors. And in difference to the United States and United Kingdom, in Germany it's allowed to make PR for an IPO. So I can reach private investors. And in some of my IPOs, for example, an IPO which was 1.2 billion euros, we had a retail quote of 20%. That means 240 million euros were invested by private investors through our campaign. So this, from my point of view, could help the Istanbul financial marketplace to be the #1 place in the Islamic world, a hub to the Asian world, and also a hub to the European world, and with the Nasdaq Corporation worldwide. So I think there is a huge potential in the future, and we are one of the partners of Borsa Istanbul and try to bring foreign companies to this place. To be honest, it was not so easy during the last 12 months because of several political reasons, but I think the situation will change, and then it might be a good opportunity.
Now, I love that idea of dual listing, except that I would suggest Istanbul and New York as a better combo, because at that point you can have 16-hour-a-day trading.
Yeah. Good point. Now, Hubertus, you have very powerfully told us all the great innovations that happened in Frankfurt. Especially, I know we had a chat last night about your internet, your trading platform, Internet Hub, which is sort of best in class. Can Frankfurt and can centers such as the Nasdaq, which is also very much best in class on the technological side, what can you two big guys do, and also us in London, because the London Stock Exchange, we are not slouches either. What can these centers do to help the newer centers, the emerging centers, such as Istanbul along? And I know that you have very concrete plans and ideas.
Big question. Very big question. Let me probably start with, first of all, New York Stock Exchange and Frankfurt Deutsche Börse obviously tried to merge, which was not permitted by the authorities. I think that would have been a perfect setup to provide for what.
If you like monopolies.
Yeah. No, it would not be a monopoly, because as you know, most of the trading now has moved off the stock exchanges, and there is a competition which clearly is very healthy. So from what you're saying is, I would sort of, before I go to capital markets, I would go a step before. So when does financing really serve the real economy? When does financing really have a big contribution to development? It is in the early days when you open up for trade, and Turkey has always been at the crossroads between East and West, and as we all know, the main new trading routes would be south-south. It would be the trading routes between China and Turkey, it would be India and Turkey. We would believe that this area would be an area really where financial services in Istanbul would play to its strengths. And here comes the currency issue. As of today, very many of these trades have to go through a big trading currency. Obviously, the US dollar being the biggest, the euro being the second biggest. That not necessarily is the most efficient way to do. If you look at the fact in quite a few of those countries, you don't have the financial instruments to hedge your exposure for those currencies. So what can be done here is clearly establishing the South-South currency trade, which we believe is also can be supported by respective instruments from the capital markets, which clearly the Nasdaq as well as Deutsche Börse is doing. So we believe this trade supporting sort of financial infrastructure is the very first to focus on, because here the biggest benefits are lying.
Thank you very much. And absolutely.
Your question started with the question about technology or innovation in technology. Let me just say that, and not because I have to, but because I believe it, I think we have world-class technology, and in some ways, some of the best technology. But it's irrelevant, because all of the major exchanges have world-class technology. And the trading experience of one versus another is only marginal. So that, we can boast we have the fastest, which we do, but it's irrelevant except for a very, very minute segment of the market where speed is it's speed over alles. So at the end of the day, it really isn't a question of the technology per se. It is if you don't have it. So you have to have it. That's the first thing. But you can have the greatest technology in the world, but if you don't have one product that you're selling, most exchanges in the world do not have a full arsenal of products. They're usually either an equity exchange or a commodities or futures exchange or an options exchange as their primary source. The one thing that Istanbul has done with the government is they actually passed a law that consolidates all the exchanges under one umbrella with central clearing. That's, I said it earlier in the day, that's very, very important, and it's the envy, I think, of the world, certainly of the exchanges, that you can create such an enterprise. The second thing it has to have is liquidity. So the technology actually is the easiest part. If you don't have it, you can buy it. The liquidity is a much harder and more complicated question. Then within it all, you then have to have best of class, meaning you have to have regulation that is perceived as being the driver of integrity, of transparency, of fairness, etc., which are absolutely incredible. If your market or any market or financial center has a reputation of being, I'll use the toughest word, corrupt, people are just going to shy away from that unless they have no other choice. So the technology, it's not the innovation in technology. It's the technology that that drives the innovation of new products and new ideas. So I think that's a point that I think I want to make as a differentiator. And by the way, you can defend AIM. I don't think it's the strongest of markets. When the point you made about the kinds of product that they take is a good point. On the other hand, the transparency, people have to understand that if you're listed there, you're taking one heck of a risk.
Absolutely. It's not for orphans or widows.
That's right. We at NASDAQ are starting a new market for non-listed companies out of California. It'll be a market where it'll be kind of an auction, and it's slowly beginning to roll out. And it's a function of the changes of U.S. law called the Jobs Act. And that kind of embryonic market is very, very important, and we have high expectations for it.
Thank you so much. This was very rich from everybody. Thank you very much. We have very little time left because Mr. Furcher has a hard stop. So I would say I take 2 very short questions, one after another. You tell me who you want to ask, and then very short answers, and I do a little summation, as I always do. And when you ask your questions, not more than 1 sentence, and please say who you are and whom you represent. Anybody has a question? Well, in that case, as Sandy has to leave, I think I'm going to go into the summation. Thank you, everybody. It was really very good, and I thought it was brilliant to have 2 Europeans here, an American here, all of whom with deep expertise in emerging markets.
So the result is 2-1.
Mr. Fed also spent a lot of his life as the chief economist for Asia of Deutsche Bank, so he has a lot of emerging markets experience as well. What we've seen today is there is a lot. There are, the financial centers are continuously innovating. Frankfurt is a good example with new products, especially also with a new technological architecture, with being very close to the ECB and therefore being the clearinghouse for the euro, which is the 2nd most traded currency in the world. We've talked about what does it take to have a financial center, and it is that depth, that culture, that wanting to go and live there. And your wife, by the way, needs to enjoy it too, because otherwise, whoever...
Or your husband.
Yeah, because otherwise, if you have people working for you and their spouses are unhappy, let me tell you, it makes for a very unhappy performance. Then, should Istanbul focus on its strengths? So should financial centers focus on their strengths? And I think there was a unanimous thing of yes, if you have a strength, if you have a cultural heritage, if you're in the middle of East-West, in the middle of the Islamic world, by all means do focus. We have also spoken to, there's more than just equity and more just listing, and Mr. Kirchhoff very powerfully said, look, you need to think, are we really big enough? Where should we be? It will be interesting, by the way, to see whether Zalando really lists in Germany or whether they're going to the US. That will be a very interesting. Lastly, we said, look, it's very important for stock exchanges to have a full arsenal of products and to have best-in-class regulation. And one very wise word was we also need to be equipped going forward to be able to do that south investing, where the dollar and the euro may not necessarily always be the clearing currency, although I think we still will live with the dollar for a long, long time to come. With no further ado, gentlemen.
What do you think about bitcoins?
Oh, it's very interesting. It's just incredibly volatile. It's incredibly volatile. And I was actually asked on the BBC at some stage, what do I think about Bitcoin? It's the volatility scares me, but I guess it's something when it has more depth, if the market becomes deeper and also regulated, it's right now totally unregulated, there could be a future. What do you think, gentlemen? What do you think?
I think before it really takes off, I think the treasurers or the treasuries of the world are going to say, we're willing to give up paper and go digital, but we're not willing to give up our currency. So the fight back, the pushback will be from sovereign states who are going to try to preserve or create a Bitcoin type of digital currency for their own countries.
Mr. Fitt?
I believe it's going to be a niche, because it's going to be a niche in the beginning. It's not going to be the big players. The treasurers, obviously, they have little difficulties and are very low transaction costs. For them, it's not a problem. But for the small and medium enterprises that go into, let me give you an example, an Indian and Pakistani company which start trading, which maybe will going to experience not too distant future, then obviously another currency comes into play.
And it could have a future in Germany, a bit bitter.
No, but the interesting thing there is, I guess also it's the regulatory framework. It would need to be better regulated. But on a last note, if you want to fly to space, I understand that Virgin takes bitcoins as payment for space tourism. So on that happy note, I don't want to send you all out to outer space, but I know that Mr. Meyer-Furcher has to leave. Thank you, gentlemen. You've been a fantastic panel. Very enlightening. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.